Hello Year 6, it's Miss Jobbins here with today's brag lesson on relative clauses and relative pronouns. Today our lesson objective is to use a relative clause to add information to a noun. And our success criteria is to I know that a complex sentence has at least two clauses. I can use relative pronouns who, which, where, when, and whose to begin a subordinate clause. And I know that what is not a relative pronoun, and I know that a relative pronoun comes after a main noun. So before we start, we're going to remind ourselves what is a relative clause, what is a relative pronoun, what is a subordinate clause. So before we start, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like us all to please write down in our books what is a relative pronoun. What is a relative pronoun? What is a relative clause? And what is a subordinate clause? Have a think. What is a subordinate clause? What is a relative clause? And what is a relative pronoun? Please pause this video and then we'll go through them to remind ourselves. Hello and welcome back. Now we know, let's start with something that we've already recapped yesterday and the day before and the day before that. What is a subordinate conjunction? Now we know a conjunction is a word or words used to connect two clauses together. Words such as although, because, and when. A subordinate clause is part of a sentence that adds additional information to a main clause. A subordinate conjunction is simply the word or words that is used to join a subordinating clause to another clause. For example, my sentence that I gave the other day is, he was annoyed the train had stopped. He was annoyed because the train had stopped. By adding the word because to my sentence, I am linking the subordinate clause, the train had stopped, with the main clause, he was annoyed. So essentially, it's using one word to join two sentences. Can you write your own example down now? Please, can you pause the video? Well done and welcome back. Now, we're going to recap before we start over what is a relative clause. Now, a relative clause adds extra information about the subject or the object noun phrase in the main clause. It is dependent on the main clause because it only makes sense when paired with one and cannot be used as a standalone sentence. This is why relative clauses is a type of subordinate clause that is used to describe a noun phrase. Relative clauses are optional as they only add additional information about the subject or object of the main clause. And relative clauses can describe people, things, including animals, places, ideas, or just about any noun, as long as they are referring to the subject or the object noun phrase contained within the main clause. So we know essentially that a relative clause holds the extra information about the subject or the object noun phrase, and it's doing all of the work in terms of portraying the meaning. We then have a relative pronoun. So pause that and let that sink in. We know that a relative pronoun is used when a relative clause holds the extra information. The relative pronoun is simply the word that introduces the relative clause so that listeners or readers know whether the speaker or writer is referring to the subject or object noun phrase from the main clause. Now that might have all seemed a lot of like gobbledygook. So we're going to start with a simple sentence. Matthew was playing the guitar. It's not very interesting. So why don't we add some extra information? For example, Matthew was playing the guitar. He was in his bedroom. Boring, but it's a simple sentence. Okay, so it is still simple. So how could we improve this? Remembering with a thesaurus to upscale these words because we're year 6. So Matthew, we're going to make it a complex sentence. Matthew was playing the guitar in his bedroom. That's our simple one. The second sentence adds a bit of non-vital information to the first one. So we could drop in a relative clause like this. Matthew, who was in his bedroom, was playing the guitar. So we've dropped in there, in purple, is our relative clause. So Matthew, comma, always need a comma, like our fronted adverbials, who was in his bedroom, was playing the guitar. Here we can see the main clause is Matthew was playing the guitar. We've now added in a subordinate clause, who was in his bedroom. The main clause could be a sentence by itself and still make sense. Matthew was playing the guitar. However, the second sentence is now a subordinate clause. which doesn't make sense by itself. Who was in his bedroom? So essentially, it's a sentence that doesn't make sense on its own and adds information to a main clause. So the subordinate clause has to be stapled into the sentence with commas. So now, it's all relative then. We've replaced the pronoun in the second sentence with a relative pronoun. Can you spot it? So we've got our simple sentence. Matthew was playing the guitar. He was in his bedroom. So we've now got our main clause. Matthew was playing the guitar. We've added in that subordinate clause, who was in his bedroom. We've changed he to who. Who is a relative pronoun we use to replace people, so nouns and pronouns. Other relative pronouns include which is a relative pronoun, and we use it to replace objects or nouns. Apples grow on trees. They are very healthy. Really boring, simple sentence. So we upscale that and add in this. Apples, which are very healthy, grow on trees. We've now added in our relative pronoun. Other ones include whose. We also have where. The relative pronoun always goes straight after the main noun, so sometimes we have to reorder the clause slightly. We also have when. Now you're going to take your time as you go through these and identify them each, but as you can see, my becomes when. The relative pronoun that is used for relative clauses where the added information is vital to the meaning of the sentence. When using that, we tend not to use commas around the relative clause. For example, the old house that is next door to the school is up for sale. So instead of not as well as, a relative pronoun are used in relative clauses. Can you spot wrong with the new sentence? My mum is a doctor. Her name is Safira. My mum, whose name is Safira, is a doctor. This shows here a relative clause and pronoun. The writer has left the pronoun in the new subordinate clause as well as adding a relative pronoun. We also need to think about punctuation. Relative clauses containing vital information have to be separated from the main clause. Typically, we use commas to mark the relative clauses, although dashes, so also known as hyphens, and brackets can be used. So as you can see here, a comma has been inserted and a full stop. We can also, when moving it around, include brackets or dashes. What have we learned by the end of this sentence? Can you think about these? Have you learnt these and followed these? Now, if that's really difficult to follow, please can I remind you that you've also got all of these videos to follow here, and you've also got a second PowerPoint, which I'm not going to take you through because it should be relatively simple to follow, a second PowerPoint full of reminders to help you. Once you've done that, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like you to go through each of these 4 worksheets, and then primarily finishing on the relative clause and relative pronouns test at the end. Please can I remind you to mark each of these at the end of the test using a green or purple pen. Now, if you do need some help, please watch the videos and also get in touch with us. We'd be more than happy to help you out at any time. Best of luck. Bye.